Welcome to another episode of Epic Understanding. I am your host, Coach Love, and I am just excited, humbled, and delighted, but at the same time, realizing the subject that we are talking about, I am a bit taken back because we're talking about women in war. And my heart, honestly, would love for there never to be war, but that's just not a fact. That is not something that is our reality. There has been wars since almost the beginning of time. And women's role has somewhat not had a voice. Okay. It's been episodic when we have a voice. But I have come to understand that women and their role, really our role in war, is monumental, unforgettable, and our stories must be told. So that is why I have a wonderful panel of women here for with us tonight. Um, the subject matter is Ukraine because that is the current war that we're in. It's the war in Ukraine. So I have Julia Bendis. She is actually here with me now. Hello, Julia. How
Hi.
are you? Good. She was actually born in Ukraine, and then you grew up in the Soviet Union until you were about how old?
I was born in Ukraine, but we lived in the Baltic states and Latvia. And we immigrated, escaped, communism back in 1989. I was 13.
You were 13 years old. So Julia is going to be sharing her personal story um, about growing up there, and then also all the work that you've been doing with your family members, getting them to understand the reality versus the propaganda that's being shared, correct?
I haven't been doing work with my family. I've been doing a lot of work with NGOs, organizations, translating and trying to help from afar, no, most people understand what's going on over there. Obviously, yes, there's a lot of propaganda that's coming out of Russia that people are still watching. And unfortunately, some people are still believing that this was somehow Ukrainians' fault and the government of Ukraine fault that this happened. Unfortunately, most of that stuff is false, obviously. But I think and I'm hoping most people are understanding that this is a war and it's not a justified invasion, as a lot of Russian government wants you to believe.
Ah, I see. I'm very thankful for what you have been doing. And we also have Rocio Palmero.
Hi, how are you? My name is
Hi, how are you?
Palmero. How are you? How's everyone?
Excellent. And just, I'm going to start off right off and say thank you for your service.
Thank you. I am wearing my pin today that says I am a woman veteran.
Oh, I love
Yes.
that.
Thank you.
Not only are you a woman veteran, but you advocate for women.
I do. I do. The experience, men and women are so different, and it's so difficult. We go into the service and it's just like, okay, everyone is the same, everyone is equal, but it's not. It can't be, right? Physically, we're different, mentally and emotionally, we're different. And so it's so important to take that into account when we come off service, when we come the veterans, when we're talking to people and we're asking them and we're trying to provide supportive services for them. And so, and that's important. And then I'm looking forward to really having this discussion about the women and the participation of women during this war in Ukraine, because it is so dear to my heart. The way that women are always contributing to the war, to any war, in the United, whether it be in the United States or whether it be in Ukraine, whether it be anywhere, we always see that women don't just lay down and say, okay, that's enough. We see women always wanting to do their part because they're invested in everything that's happening.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And now we have Leeza Steindorf. She is a global citizen, we shall say. She grew up in Europe, and she helps empower female leaders across the globe so that their voices are truly heard and that they realize their power. As a matter of fact, we were talking, and you told me a story, Lisa, about a woman who was a CEO, but yet still felt as if she was number two. And she was truly number one. And so Lisa helps women realize their power and break the glass ceiling within so that we as women can break the glass ceiling as a whole.
Absolutely. Nice to be here, Coach Love. Thank you. Lovely to be with you women as well.
Thank you.
Excellent. So, ladies, let's get started. I am curious. I'm going to start off with you, Julia. What are your thoughts as a woman regarding the war in Ukraine?
Well, what thoughts can there be, besides outrage, tears? It's not really thoughts, but I stopped crying a few days ago because I realized, well, I have no more tears left, really. It's personal, obviously. I have been an advocate for women my entire life. When we came to United States, like I said, I was 13, but when the collapse of Soviet Union happened all over Eastern Europe, what was happening was there was a lot of people obviously didn't have enough money, didn't have jobs, and women especially, were very resourceful. Girls, women, young women were looking for work outside of Eastern Europe. Well, of course, people will take advantage, and there was a lot of human trafficking coming strategically from Eastern Europe because these were women that didn't speak English. They would take their passports away and say, I'm holding it for you because, he's a man. Therefore, I'm just going to surrender and he knows what he's doing. They would bring them over. And when I heard about it, I was actually just out of high school. My parents don't even know this, and I'm hoping they're not listening. But I started going to motels with my boyfriend at the time, who was really a big guy, and basically trying to get these girls out. What I didn't realize is most of them are, drug lords and mafia, whatever, Russian, whatever you want to call them. Um, they had weapons. Obviously, you had to be careful. So he would stand guard. And while the trafficker would leave, I would run up the stairs and just pound on the door and scream in Russian, get out. I'm here to help. A lot of the times they wouldn't come out because, they've been scared to death. We're going to kill your family. We know where everybody lives. They believe them. So ever since then, I kind of I went to school for social work. My husband says I'm terrible at it because I wanted to bring everybody home. And when I have my own kids, as you can imagine, you cannot handle that. You cannot handle on a personal level. So I've always been an advocate for human trafficking, women, girls, boys, and offering translation services. And then, of course, we know they've been bringing girls from all over the world. So, yeah, I mean, this is when the weeks before, obviously, we were feeling there was something happening, something is brewing. You felt that sense of, no, this can't happen. This can't happen. Not again. I mean, World War II was just 77 years ago, not that long. My Ukrainian side of the family, my mom's side of the family, her dad, my grandfather fought in the Red Army against the Germans, the Nazis. And on my dad's side of the family, who are all from the Baltics, from Latvia, they pretty much all were killed in concentration camps because Stalin pretty much gave the Baltics to Hitler. He said, well, go ahead, invade them, but leave Russia alone. And my grandfather, who was, 18 years old when the war started, literally got on his bike and ran to a train station and escaped because it was the last train with the Russian soldiers leaving the Baltics, and it was the only reason he escaped. And his dad survived the concentration camps by sheer fact that he was a mechanic. He knew how to work on tanks, on cars, and the Nazis put him to work. All the women, the mother, the children, they think they were killed pretty fast in the beginning. There's another story we just found out, which is shocking still to me when I think about it. We had no idea this even happened until other family members told us about it. When my great-grandfather came back from concentration camps to the city where they lived and was looking for relatives, anyone that may have survived. He was walking around in the streets trying to come back to his apartment. And he saw his Latvian neighbor outside of the building who basically pointed a finger and said, "Oh yeah, there's Jews right there next door, go get them." And he was rounding up the Jews. As you know, the Nazis appointed people in each cities to do their dirty work, to gather up the Jews. And so he basically, and they were friends. They lived next door to each other for years, and he just like that gave up the entire family. So and my great-grandfather was a very small man, 5'5" maybe. He picked up some piece of wood and beat him to death. And so you're reading the story because this came from another relative, and you're like, oh my God. First of all, he killed a man. Second of all, hell yeah, I would have done the same thing. But at the same time, you're conflicted, right? Does one life justify killing another life, losing whatever you want to call it? So anyway, these stories still coming out because people did not talk about the horrors of war. They just shut down completely. None of my grandparents ever talked about it. So as we were watching this, and my aunt still has a brother there and his whole family. We have friends, we have, distant, very distant relatives that we obviously haven't talked to in years, but it's our home country. Even though I lived in Latvia, I always considered Ukraine my hometown. So it's devastating. It's absolutely shocking to see what's happening. And at the same time, women do much worse during a crisis than men, right? We all know women suffer the most during war. So you keep thinking about what are those soldiers going to do next? Because we know in every war what they do, right? When they invade countries. So yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a lot. It's been very...
It is a lot. It is a lot. Rosero, I'm curious, as I listened to Julia speak, I could not help but imagine the strollers lined up that I've been seeing. And I would like to hear your take on that as a mother, because I know there is a lot of abandonment when it comes to children, when it relates to war and women in the military. Share your thoughts, please. You're on mute. You're on mute, darling.
Thank you. I just want to say that, first of all, I have so much respect and admiration for women globally, right? Because it's not just our responsibility to survive for ourselves, but often it's to survive for our children, right? Or our parents, right? We have to find a way to overcome and to figure these things out. And we've seen it, right? We've seen it to Julia's concern about rape, right? We saw what happened in Bosnia, right? And that wasn't the first time that it happened, but that was the first time people in the world woke up and said, you know what, this is disgusting. We cannot allow this to happen. And again, so it became part of the Geneva Convention, right? Soon after that, it became part of the Geneva Convention. So we had all these men going off to war. We had all these men in these trials and everything else. And we hear all these stories that came out about raping, about murder, but we go back even further to the Holocaust. We know that Nazi soldiers would rape Jewish women in the streets. And I've seen pictures of women after it, right? These things create a brokenness in us as women, a brokenness in us as mothers, right? And whether we want to or not, it's transferred to our children. Now, we see sometimes there's families who have generations of war, right? We see what happened in Chad, right? We see several African countries and nations. We see that these children, that's all they know is war. They don't know the stability of parents. They don't know the stability of a home. All they know is war, because as young as 6 years old are being taken up and they're bearing arms. And so we think about Ukraine, and what I think about is, I remember when the Iron Curtain fell. I remember as a child listening to Reagan and not wanting him to talk because I did not want Star Wars, right? Because they were talking about Star Wars, but it wasn't Lucas's Star Wars. It was this other Star Wars, and I just didn't want there to be a war. But not once did it occur to me what women were having to do in order to survive, what women were having to do in order to ensure that their children were being fed. We didn't never talk about, even when I worked with homeless people, with the homeless organization trying to place people in this shelter. I did job training, and the women never talked about what they had to do to make sure that they were safe. Women never talked about what they had to do in order to make sure that they ate. Women never talked about what they had to do in order to keep their addiction going. And we know now, and we talk about it more openly. It's still hard to talk about, but what is the one thing that we can always make profit off of is our sex, right? As long as there's people out there paying for it, that's how often women will be able to do that, right?
And you got, just not to interrupt you, but that generational trauma that you're talking about, every single woman carries that over from one to another. Those women that were trafficked after the fall of communism were probably still carrying their mothers and grandmothers' trauma from the war and from the Holocaust. And it just does not end, because we do carry that for generations.
Absolutely. And I just want to mention one more thing, Coach Love, because I know you probably want to move on to Miss Leeza. But there's a book written saying, when, I think it's called When the Body Remembers, right? You sit there and psychologically you're like, I'm fine. It's okay. It happened. It's in the past. But that's not true. It pops out. It pops out in issues with the organs, with circulation, depression, physics. Some immuno diseases are associated with that undealt with trauma. And we know that it happens. There's scientific proof, so you can't deny it. And so I see these strollers. And for me, that is that opportunity for a woman to say, you know what, this is all I can offer you, but this is all I have, and you can have it, right? That unity, because as a mother, do you really want to know that another mother cannot feed her child? Do you really want to know that mother was trying to escape and they caught her because her baby was too heavy? Do you know that one, she's exhausted. And we don't know how many kids somebody might have and have that baby, but being able to get just that one stroller and being able to say, okay, that's one less thing that I have to worry about. Because we as women, and especially as mothers, we always put ourselves last. We're constantly going without so that our babies can have. And that is the way your body is made. If you notice, there's pictures of people who had been kidnapped, or not kidnapped, people who were being held because they were like missionaries, and they were holding them hostage because they wouldn't leave. And there's this one picture I'm never going to forget of this woman. She was all skin and bones, but her baby's fat because somehow she was still able to breastfeed that baby. This is the way our bodies are made. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
That is wonderful. And I actually have goosebumps going through my body just because I know how real this is. And I want you to know, we are not going to rush through these subjects. We are actually going to dig in the idea that women are submitting their bodies and having their sanctity taken away from them as a result of war. So we're going to definitely get into that. So we're just touching the surface on that particular issue. But Leeza, I want to talk with you because your expertise really points out women's ability to break past the trauma. And that is what you constantly work on women to do. That is what you empower women, I should say, to do. So what are some of the key traits that women have that allow them to rise above in situations such as this?
I think one of our greatest strengths is something that we don't recognize ourselves, and that is that we are not men.
Oh.
And that may sound a little simplified, but quite honestly, and it took me many decades to really understand that. My father, actually, I was born at the Air Force Academy. My father is a military man. He's actually interred there. And he was in Vietnam. He came back with what they now call PTSD. At that time, they didn't have a name for it. And he brought back with him all of the rage and terror and horror of war. He would fly in and pick up into combat zones to pick up soldiers and bodies and so forth. And so I grew up in violence inflicted upon me by a person, a human, who does not have the capacity to really digest the atrocities of war, right? So the individuals, whether they are soldiers or civilians, we're not made emotionally, psychologically, spiritually to grasp that horror. And as Rocio was just mentioning, that book is wonderful. Body Keeps the Score. That trauma gets stored within our physical being, but also generationally. In my experience, it was passed on to me, quite literally, physically. And so it took me many decades and a lot of work, spiritual work, emotional work, also physical work too, and trauma work, to let that work itself out. So trauma is when it's so overwhelming, the body just can't deal with it, so it gets stored because we just don't know what to do with it. And that's why, as both ladies were just saying, is that women just march on it because that's what we need to do. But that doesn't go away; it gets stored. And so trauma work is incredibly important, both generational as well as individual and familial, to let that be visited in a safe situation where it can be healed. It can come to the surface and it can be processed. In my circumstances, it took me many decades to come to the understanding that that man who came back with all of that horror from the war was doing the best he could with what he had. What was powerful for me, in an answer to your question, Coach Love, is that I recognized that the most healing experience was when I allowed myself to be female in that. Because my father wanted boys and he was all male. And so he raised us that way. And I identified, really, now it's a term to identify as male, but my identity was very masculine. And what I recognized then as being a female, the strength in that, the fierceness, the beauty, the depth, the commitment, the tenacity, right? And that was even before I had children. And then, of course, with motherhood, but even if we don't give birth ourselves, we are life givers. Our bodies are made for that. Our hearts and souls hold the container for humanity to weep and to celebrate for all of that. And so I feel that the strength that we have is in our feminine power, not as opposed to men, not as opposed to the masculine, but as a complement. We need all of it. We need the very best of what the masculine can offer this world. And we need the very best of what the feminine can offer. And when we have the masculine at its worst, when it's out of control, we have war. And when we have the feminine out of control and its worst, we have drama, right? In all of its forms. And that can get really nasty. It's not to be estimated. So it's helping individuals know who they are in their core. And we all have the masculine and feminine in us. If we are female, and we identify as such, to dig in and let that live through us in the highest and the clearest form it possibly can be. That's our strength.
I have an interesting question. Do you believe we would be at war if there was a woman in charge?
In charge of which country? In Ukraine or in Russia?
Or in general?
Well, I was really thinking, if all of the personalities, if everybody involved was a woman, would we be at war? If Putin was a woman, if the president of Ukraine was a woman, if Biden was a woman, everybody, poof, they're women now. Would we be at war?
I'm going to jump in just with
Okay.
please forgive me. I think you need to quantify that question.
Okay, help me.
Because
Help
not
me.
every man would go to war.
Mm-hmm.
And not every woman would avoid it. I think it really depends on how connected those women are to their own femininity and to their role in the world as life givers and life holders.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my premise. Anyway, that's my input.
I was going to say, I think if they're mothers, they're more likely to avoid war and to try to come some kind of compromise. But then again, maybe not. There's a lot of mothers who are not very maternal, who are kind of hands off and maybe not as sensitive to emotions and feelings. But I would think if you're a mother in some way, biologically or not, you would try and avoid it as much as possible. And going back to what you said, Leeza, which I had a question for you, because as a matchmaker, someone who's in relationship industry, on top of having my own children, what would you say to people who have had relatives pass down that generational trauma, which with a lot of Jewish people, there is still, I mean, we all know about the Jewish guilt, but the whole Holocaust, I survived. Why did they not? And it just gets passed down. And I was trying to explain this to someone the other day, that I feel like the generation after the people that were affected by the war, any wars really, right? But I'm just talking about me in particular, my own family. So 1945, it ended. My grandparents just got married. They were trying to have children. So their children, my parents, were just trying to survive and get things back on track. But then their children actually had the time now to kind of look back and say, whoa, this happened. Can we start talking about it? Can we, start learning about it in schools? And I feel like my generation and my brother's generation, and those of us that were probably, maybe in our 40s, it's like we're continuing it because we're the ones talking about it now. My parents don't want to talk about it because the war, the days after that, there was, especially during communism, no food, no anything. But I'm talking about with my kids, and sometimes I feel like, am I transferring that trauma over to them because I'm talking about it so much? How do you avoid that?
So I want to get this in there because Leeza, your premise is that women would somehow avoid war. That's your, no, is that, am I misunderstanding? What am I'm wondering because you said with men we have drama. I'm sorry, with women we have drama, with men we have war. And so I'm just like,
Wait, but that's not what I said.
No, but can I just piggyback? Because what Leeza was saying was that it had to do with what not every woman is going to keep from going to war, and not every man is going to go into war. And I wanted to just piggyback on that because when I look at the characters, when I look at the actors, right, and everything that's going on, what my understanding is of what Putin is trying to do, it wasn't an overnight decision. I feel like at some point, someone in his life said, go ahead, try it. What's the worst that can happen? And he had success in this one thing. And they said it again. Hey, what's the worst that can happen? Let's see who opposes you. And he did it again. And so I feel like this is what influenced him to think, hey, I'll go ahead and launch this war. Let's see what happens. Who's going to come against me, right? This is what he's thinking. Mm-hmm. And he's taking advantage of the fact that the other players don't want war either, or they're not in a position to have that war. So I think it doesn't have to do with gender. I think it has to do with how people are raised, right? What can they say? When I was growing up, it was like, I was we were a poor immigrant family, right? We were living in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I just remember in my family, it was safer not to try it because then no one could stop you. No one could say no to you. Like no one, and that was bad, right? Even when I went to apply for grad school, my brother was like, well, what's the point of you going to grad school? You're not going to make that much money than anyone else. Just save yourself some trouble, right? Because you still, my family still has this mentality.
Yeah.
Right? My brother could do what he wants, but I'm a woman. I have my son. Like, it's enough. Like, you've done enough. And so we look at those players and we look at everything that is coming to play. And so I understand what Leeza is saying is that gender is not what determines it. It's the mindset of the individual.
Okay,
But
good.
also-
I think we're on the same page then. I think we're on the same page then, because I don't think gender determines it. And I asked that question is because, as this, conversation started to bubble up and I had the title Women in War, people make comments like, well, if a woman was in charge, we wouldn't be at war. And I said, why do you say that?
So I would like to clarify. What I said was it depends on how clear and strong women are in their own femininity. The same thing with men, right? So if we look at someone like Putin, who is very ego driven, he's right no matter what. He's the dictator. He's going to make decisions. There are other men that lead in the world that are different than that. So I don't believe that we can say if women were in charge, it wouldn't be that way.
So let me just jump in right here. I want to ask this question because this is the part that I wanted to drive on. Are you saying that femininity is less likely to go to war?
That's a more accurate question. I'm going to say that if the feminine aspects of us as humans, masculine, men and women, we all have masculine, we all have feminine. When some of the attributes of the feminine are connection, nurturing, communication. Those are female attributes receiving. If we have those in the forefront, if there's a conflict, speaking as a mediator now, if there's a conflict and I want to understand, if I want to make sure that everybody involved is going to be heard, if I want to make sure that life and connection is going to be promoted, community, which is what our tribal roots is about. If that's in the forefront and those are feminine attributes, it doesn't mean it has to be a woman. If those are in the forefront, we would not come to war. We would have communication. And I'll share something with you. When the European explorers came to the continent of what is now known as the United States, North America, when they hit the shores here, they wanted to speak to the leaders of the indigenous people who populated this continent. They were mostly women. They were matriarchal, especially on the eastern seaboard. Most of the tribes on the eastern seaboard were matriarchal and matrilineage. So the women led, and the women were the property owners, and the children and the lineage went through the mother's line. The Europeans wanted to talk to the leaders, so the women came because they were the leaders. And the Europeans said, "We don't want your women. We want your leaders." So what happened? They sent their warriors. Because their warriors were male, but they were not the people who had the understanding of how do we keep peace, how do we promote, how do we continue to hunt and gather, how do we do our crops, how do we raise our children, how do we make sure that we're in integration with one another and in good relations with each other. Those are feminine attributes, but not only women carry them.
So I definitely see that. And that really is the question that I should have asked. But at the same time, those are wonderful things, right? I love all those things. Why are we calling those feminine? I'm just curious. Why are those attributes labeled as feminine?
There are forces in the world, the yin and the yang. There are different energies. There's even in electronics and physics, there are opposing forces or complementary forces, and they're needed to give each other that energy to make something thrive. So we may connect it with woman or man, but they're aspects that create a whole, right? And in a plant, whether it's the trunk or the leaves, right, or the earth and the water, whatever we want to look at, they're complementing elements. And so if we come back to the war, if we would look at how are we going to communicate, how are we going to actually work with one another? One of the important things about what's happening right now is that social media and media in general is getting through. The Russian people and the Ukrainian people, the actual people, not the soldiers, they're suffering. They're being killed, or they're being they're having their resources taken away. There are women and children in Russia, just like there are in the Ukraine. The humans on the ground are the ones that suffer, the civilians. But what's happening now is because they're starting to understand, wait a minute, what are all those people, all those egos deciding on what's going to happen and who's going to own what? Why are they deciding about how whether my child gets fed tomorrow morning or whether we're safe when we go to bed tonight? And media is starting to get that message across, and people are rising up and saying, hey, wait a minute, we're not okay with what's going on. And that's something of the 21st century that we didn't have back in the Second World War and wars previously.
You gave us a lot to unpack there, but this is Ing, and he is pointing out the sense that I have. Men feel downgraded when you call them feminine, but it sounds to me that femininity may be the missing ingredient at the table.
So I just want to point out to you, I understand why you would feel that femininity is a derogatory term. But if you look at it, we have, what Leeza is saying is that we have feminine traits and masculine traits. And I grew up with that, right? Like, why was I playing softball? Why did I play volleyball? Why did I go in the military? That's what boys do, but that's a cultural thing. We've implemented that. We've said to someone, you know what? Being called a girl is bad. Well, yeah, okay, I understand. If you're a boy and you don't want to be called a girl, yes, that is bad. But the truth of the matter is that we have feminine traits, we have masculine traits, right? But and also, I mean, if you look at the science, we all have some testosterone and some estrogen, right? That's just the way our bodies are made. So maybe if we look and start trying to change and address what at the essence of everything it is, we'll see and we'll be able to notice that, well, maybe this is. I have guy friends who are such good girl dads, right? They're sensitive. They'll play in the kitchen. Let's have tea time. There's nothing wrong with that. I used to love playing trucks with my son. I wanted to play trucks when I was little, but because I was a girl, I was told I'm not supposed to play with trucks. Well, guess what? Right. We discovered that when children play with toys that have wheels, it helps to stimulate the part of the brain that does math. Right. So here they were hindering me all my life. They were trying to set me up to fail. Not every play with trucks.
And all the boys get to go and become mathematicians and engineers, and the girls never had the opportunity to even be near those things that will teach them, you know. And I just wanted to mention one thing, as I didn't want to interrupt earlier when you were talking, Leeza, but what you said about communication. It's not about whether a leader is a man or a woman. It's about talking. It's about having those feelings and emotions, being feminine, all of the above. And I think this is a big reason why so many people, not so many, I shouldn't say that, small amount of the Russian population that is in United States, or at least in, outside of Russia and Eastern Europe, they feel like Putin has been trying to get a hold of and get in touch and be heard for so long, and no leaders in the world have been listening to him. He's been threatening, he's been talking, he's been saying things. No, I'm not justifying at all. I'm just saying this is what the Russian communities have been saying. And in a way, they're right. Yes, nobody is listening to him because everyone's kind of done to him what they did to Trump. Oh, he's just a crazy old man. He's just a crazy egomaniac, whatever, But they should be listening, because this is what an egomaniac will do. And yes, his feelings are hurt. And what do men do when their feelings are hurt? Let's go and hurt somebody. Let's go and, and yeah, you're right. If it was a female that had the same type of temperament and the same type of emotions, maybe she would have done the same thing. But this is what happens when you don't take things seriously, unfortunately.
There's also, excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
But there's a saying that says, hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
It's not hurt men, or hurt women.
Yes.
Hurt people hurt people, right? And you're right. It's so hard. I feel like the whole world is constantly dealing with emergency, right? Like crisis mode. Everything is in crisis mode. Well, what's the latest crisis here? What's the latest crisis there? And if we would have paid attention, right? Putin, I believe he's the He's on. I think he was the head of the KGB at one time. He had all.
He
these
wasn't the head.
Or
I'm pretty sure he wasn't the head. I don't think he was smart enough to be the head of the KGB, but he was in there for a long, long time.
right.
You know, and what is it? 22 now that he's the president of a democracy.
But my favorite thing that's come out right prior, if there is one thing that's come out, there was a woman who did a TikTok, and she was talking about Putin, Russia being almost an abusive. It was an abusive relationship where he was the one sitting outside the door waiting. Oh, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything. And then next thing you know, he attacks. And there was more than one comparison to that being an abusive relationship, right? An unhealthy relationship where you're scared, right? And I thought that was such an interesting metaphor for what was happening there, right? Knowing full well, we sit there and we look at the war, and a lot of people, the first thing I'm thinking about is money. The second thing I'm thinking about is world safety. The third thing I was thinking about, unfortunately, was the effect on women and children, how that's breaking up the home, and how generations are going to be recovering from all of these things. And it's just like, wait a second, sir. Excuse me, sir. Did you really not take into consideration? Like, nobody's thinking. He was not able to think past this place of how this is going to affect all of these people, right?
He doesn't care. He couldn't care less. And the fact that what he's done to his own economy, how badly, I was having this conversation with my parents, how badly was Russia affected by World War II? How long it took them to get up on their feet? They were still, before this happened, they were still 20 years behind most countries. You know, we still had no microwaves in the 80s and 90s. We still didn't have dishwashers. We didn't have any. We came to America in 1989. It was the first time I've seen a microwave. I didn't even know what the hell that thing was. I didn't know what a banana was. We didn't even see. And now they're going to be set back again. They were never fully recovered from the last war. So to what you were saying, to your point, not only was he not thinking about how far it's going to set back the people emotionally, but people are going to start leaving. I mean, the good thing that happened, you know, over 3 million refugees left Ukraine now. I think what really happened, and I know that this is what most of them were thinking. As soon as something started happening, sirens, first bomb, oh, hell no, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this again. My mom went through this. My grandma went through this. They pick up their kids and their pets and they're out. I think that was the best thing of how many people left. But over 3 million refugees. And yes, there's been a lot of talk about how there were a lot of African students and people from Syria, people from Afghanistan that fled that war and went, and they weren't being let out of the borders, which I was bawling just thinking about that. But yes, there's a lot of racism in Eastern Europe. I'll be the first to admit. I didn't see a person of color till I was 13 years old. And I write about it in my book, which is, it's a funny book, but I write about the fact that I saw an Indian man, I believe, for the first time. And I think I went up to him and started rubbing his arm for a minute. And he looked at me like, what the hell are you doing? She looked at my mom like, get your child. Because I've never seen one. You know, I've never seen anyone darker than me. So, and with that, the unknown, the racism, the ununderstanding, the ignorance, and it's awful what's happening on the border. I really hope that they fix that problem, as they said, you know.
You know what? I don't know if that will be fixed in our generation. Just to be honest. And I find it remarkable that so many people forget that there were Black people who were part of Russia, even at the establishment of Russia. But people, I mean, that's not readily talked about, and it's really forgotten.
What do you mean establishment? What do you mean by that?
I mean, I'm trying to remember his name, but one of the most renowned kings of Russia was a Black man.
So you were talking about, I mean, I don't know if it was the establishment of Russia, but yeah, there were students. There were students in one of the biggest universities in St. Petersburg, Leningrad, wherever it was, you know.
Right. Let me
There's a lot of people from India that came too. Yeah.
Well, let me say what I meant by the establishment of Russia. Russia in the beginning was not necessarily about race itself. It was about belief, from what I've studied. So it was about belief. So there were people who looked like me or were much darker than me who had that belief system.
You're talking
But
about communism, or what do you mean?
no, 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 I mean about the political system and the religious system that established Russia to be that
Monarch?
established. No, not just no. It had a lot to do with religious your religion and the type of God and the type of and the type of political system. So I've been reading up on these things so I can get a better understanding of how everything came together. And there's a lot of information out there.
What I think is, and I mean, Julia, clearly you have a broader perspective, and also you, Rocio, from where you've been all over the world. In this culture, anyway, in the United States of America, if we want to call it culture, because there's so many subcultures, so let's just say society.
Right.
There's very little understanding of the centuries, if not millennia, of history that these regions have, right? If you look at the Ukraine and Russia, it goes way before the Soviet Union and then before that. And it's the same thing in the Middle East. Or if you look also in Central Europe with the First World War and the Second World War, and why all those borders were shifting and changing. And it's about power and economics, and it's about religion and who's got the right one, right? And so all those things are in play, and people in this society, in the United States at least, there's not been, except for Pearl Harbor and the own Civil War, there's not been war on these shores. Like the bombings and the things that the people are experiencing now, those are words. And people from my own background, I actually, video games are not permitted in our home because they're targeted. They have scientists and psychologists that design video games that are targeted for males between the ages of 12 and 19. They design them specifically for what those kids needs. Right. So here,
my husband makes video games, so yes, there's a whole subject on that.
But in the rest of the world, that's really happening. And I spent most of my adulthood in Germany. So married to a German person, that whole, and actually there is a book, what you're talking about it is a phenomenon. The children of the war. Mm-hmm. It's a thing. And there's a book called The Children of the Children, Kinder der Nachkriegskinder is what it's called. Children of the War Children, if you will.
Okay.
I'm writing it down now.
So though that is specifically, that book was written about children in Germany from World War II?
That is correct. About the children of the war. And so it's speaking specifically to what you were speaking about, Julie, is the generational trauma and perceptions that are passed on sometimes without knowing it. When I first got over there, I was a young woman. And just to correct, I didn't grow up I grew up actually in the United States, but I went over as a very young person to Europe. When I first got over there, if in the United States, if I needed help, I'd go to a woman, right? If you need something, if you're a young girl and you're troubled or something in public, you'd go and ask a lady clerk, or right? Yeah. In Germany, I'd go to a man. And for many years, I asked myself, why is that? And then I got to a point, I started talking to people. And of course, I was there for a number of decades and got to know the culture very deeply. As I say, my first husband's is German. And here's what I came to understand. The fathers, the brothers, the sons, the husbands, they were all gone. There was nobody left except for the women, the Turkish, and the Italians, bless all of them. They rebuilt Germany. Mm-hmm. So you have a generation of women who had to do all the work, not only of raising their children and taking care of things, but they had to rebuild that whole country. And so that was one generation, but then you come to the next generation and the German women, bless them, they are tough cookies, boy, right? They get it done. Not the often, and you can't generalize the whole culture, but German women are strong because they've had to be. And you look at any war-torn country and you're going to find the same thing with the women, because they're the ones that are left literally holding the bag, that have not only gone through the abuse and the atrocities of war, but then they're the ones left to build it, because the men they've been decimated or they're traumatized, right? So it continues on and it continues on and continues on until we do step in, we do our own personal work and we do our cultural work to heal. We have the reconciliation that's necessary.
So I wanted to just address what Coach Love was saying, right? She was indicating the Afro-Russians, right? I think in 2009, they did a survey and there was like 50,000 Afro-Russians in Russia, right? But what nobody's talking about, and this is another point that came up early in the Russia-Ukraine, war, was that we are sitting here, everybody's opening up their doors to the refugees from Ukraine. But for how many years were people turning away refugees from African nations, and the atrocities that happen in African nations, I think they hurt me so much more. Oh, I don't want to cry, because no one's paying attention. No one is saying, you know what, there's something wrong when somebody's sending or kidnapping a 6-year-old to go kill someone else. Yeah. Nobody's saying anything when a young boy is being told to have sex with his mother or else he's going to get beheaded. No one is talking about that. No one is saying anything. So I am so happy to see in this world that there's so many nations opening up their doors to refugees in need, children, families in need, right? But let's not forget that Europe does not have the cornerstone on that. We have to look at all these other countries where this has been happening for so many years. And there were some countries that did open up. My understanding is that China also had a lot of refugees from African nations. But the minute that COVID hit, these people were having their businesses taken away. I've only saw one article written on that. Businesses were taken away, they were being kicked out, and they were being kicked out of the country. That's it. You ran away from one country, you came here, everything was all good, everybody's getting sick now, so it's time for you to go. I don't even know what happened to these people. So I just want to make sure that we don't just talk about one generation. We have generations in these African nations, 2 going on 3 generations, that have never known what it's like to be a father, who don't know what it's like to have a father, who were often conceived out of rape, where their mothers were marked so that no other man would ever want them because they had had sex with the enemy. These things are atrocious. And if we're going to sit there and be sympathetic and be all like, let's help refugees, let's do something. Let's just not pick and choose who we're going to.
Yeah, I agree.
You address something that's really incredibly deep and real, and nobody likes to talk about the big elephant in the room, and that is, why do we pay attention to certain wars and skirmishes and not others? Yes. And it's not humanitarian, right? NATO has put weapons now or protection in Poland and Romania. Putin wants to make sure that NATO is not going to be anywhere affiliated with Ukraine, right? There's defensiveness there going on. If you look at the African nations, there are no resources there. There's no nuclear weapons there, right? There's no global interest there for the powers that be. And it's sad as can be. And that is a conversation that needs to be had. Absolutely.
Right.
Well, as you know, we take it there here on Epic Understanding. And we've certainly touched on this particular idea, but perhaps it would be wonderful to have your perspectives on this particular issue. I would love to have you girls back at the table. Now, we are rounding up on about an hour. Not that we're at all done with this subject matter. We are truly just getting started. But some of my girls have a hard stop. So I'm just doing a pulse check here. Who can stay for another 10 minutes or so, and who has to leave? Just checking.
I can stay for another 10 minutes.
I can do that.
Okay.
I'll make it 5.
Well, it's very heavy. I mean, it's very emotional. You know, every time I talk about this stuff, I need a day to just kind of decompress, because this is very heavy stuff. And when I tell you that I haven't slept since this started, and I had to call my doctor and say, I need something because I'm not sleeping, you know, it's real. And I'm also hurting, like you said, for people that have been sitting on the border in tents for years and raising their children in these refugee camps. You know, I mean, when you hurt for one person, you got to hurt for another person, right? And that's the same. I mean, and that was a big reason why I wrote my book too. I'm not, you know, I'm donating all the funds to help Ukraine, and with all of my services as well. I'm offering 20% off, or 20% of all of my services to donate to refugees. But I'm also not forgetting the refugees, like what you just said. They've been sitting there and people just looking the other way because they're a different shade, you know, different color.
And I just want to tell you, Julia, so currently, like I said, I work with women veterans, right? So as an MST survivor, as someone, I think there was only one unit that I was not ever sexually harassed at. Whenever I listened to other women telling their stories, I thought I was fine, right? And then my dentist showed me my teeth in the year and a half that I've been working, that they were chipped and they were ground. And because and my jaw had started to hurt. And it's because I had been grinding my teeth at night, right? And then, I just paid all this money, got my teeth fixed. Thank you. First world problems. I got my teeth fixed. Yay. All this stuff with Ukraine started to come up, and all I could think about was Bosnia. And all I could think about was women having to sell their bodies to protect their children. And all I could think about is, like, what is this woman who got caught on the wrong side? Her timing was awful. Mm-hmm. What is she going to have to do to feed her kids? Yeah. Right?
In Syria, Afghanistan.
Yeah. And I did want to make one quick point about Afghanistan. When I was attending community college, like 500 years ago, there was our professor had talked about a woman who had predicted that if we continue to take away the rights of women in Afghanistan, we needed to pay attention to that, because it was going to create an issue, and it was going to have a rise in an oppressive regime. And everybody told her to be quiet. She didn't know what she was talking about, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? She was right. And that's one of the things that really propelled the Taliban. You continue to take the rights of one group of people, and not just because they were women opposed to men, but it was what women were bringing forward, to the point that Leeza was making. I forgot. I just remembered right now. And I wanted to make sure that we were aware that we need to pay attention. We need to pay attention to the things that are going on globally. The BBC on my app, I'm constantly listening to what's going on, to have not to have what the media in the United States is feeding me, but to be able to have an overall well-rounded perspective from other nations, from other people, you know? So that was one of the things I miss of Al Jazeera, is being able.
That's wonderful. Now, hold on. Blue is here. He does keep his identity secret for security reasons, but he has a strong military background. And Blue, I would like you to ask Leeza your question as she's about to jump off. Because he has one question for each of you, but I want to start off with Leeza because she's leaving first.
Thank you.
I think I put that in the chat on YouTube, and I'm not sure what the question was now, because I can't see that. I'm on my mobile device, and if I go there, it'll kick me out of here.
That's fine. Well, what's your question for the ladies?
Well, I think I have just a general statement, which is, you know, anytime that you consider the impacts of war, war historically kills more civilians than it does combatants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Going to she just brought up Afghanistan. There was a program over there. The Marines did it. The U.S. Marines. They called it the Lionesses, and the Lionesses would go out because in Afghanistan it's inappropriate for men outside of the family to speak to women.
Mm. That's
So
pretty powerful. That's a powerful statement, oh Blue. And I'm curious what Leeza has to say about that before she gets out of here, and then I'll have you continue to address that idea.
Thank you. So we're talking here about human rights, and that's
Mhm.
been a word that's been bandied around for over a century now. What's happened in the last 2 years has brought it to the forefront. And
Mhm.
I'd like to come back to not only what you just spoke about, Old Blue, but also the comments about women not being heard and the women in Afghanistan. It really comes back to something that a dear friend of mine explained to me very strongly about Black Lives Matter.
Mhm.
Why Black lives? Why not yellow lives? Why not women's lives? Why not just because unless Black lives matter, no
No.
lives matter.
Mm.
And it's the same thing with women. Unless we understand that women need to be heard and they need to be protected, then none of us are protected. And it's that level of universal humanity that's on the table right now. That's what in my experience and in my world, is in the forefront here. Those are the conversations we need to be having. Those are the real conversations. And why a woman can't speak. And if there are religious reasons, okay. But when rights are being inhibited, women, Black, minority, pick a group. That's where we have to draw a line and say, absolutely not, because we are all human. And then we come back to this feminine and masculine. We all have parts of each other in us. Every single species, every single person is important. And I'll just say just one thing in closing. From all of the living beings on the planet, humans are less than 1%.
Oh, wow.
Because we are part of everything. We are not in charge of everything. We're part of everything. And so as being part of everything, we're also we're stewards of one another and the world. And that's not how we're behaving. And that's not a masculine or feminine or male or female thing. That's a human thing. And it's where we brought ourselves to. So the only thing I can say in prayer and hope for this current situation, that it really will be a turning point with the last 2 years that this globe has behind it. And now with this situation, that I hope that we're really at a turning point, that this really will be the last straw for us finally to get that it's humanity that we need to look at and take care of.
Mm, how powerful. Thank you so much, Leeza, for coming. I do hope you come back again. We're really just getting started on this series of The Truth of Women in War. Please do come back again.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Nice speaking with you women very much. Coach
Thank
Love,
you,
always a
Leeza.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.
So nice talk to
Pleasure.
you.
Be well.
Be well. Bye-bye for now.
I just wanted to say exactly what Leeza was saying about women's rights being taken away. Unfortunately, women's rights get taken away because of religion. Every religion has done it under, well, it's because it's in this book, or it's in this, look, it says here in our book of worship, look, it says here the woman shouldn't be doing this, this, and that. That goes for every religion. Any fundamentalist religion, this could be Islam, Judaism, anything,
Mhm.
Unfortunately, it's done under the umbrella of, well, that's religion. It's our religion.
But and you're right, Julia. It's easy to distort anything. It's easy to sit there and use anything to oppress any group of people. But that's why and justify your poor actions. Anyone can do that, right? We all know who did it when we were little. There was 3 of us in my household. We all would sit there and be like, well, didn't you say this? And didn't you say that? But I wanted to go back to what Leeza said. It was one thing that I heard someone say a while back. Human rights issues or women's issues are human rights issues, right? And that is one of those things that we have to always remember whenever one group is oppressed. Like, we're not free as long as one group is being oppressed. We can't look the other way, And so again, going back to what Julia was saying earlier, is that we can't justify what Putin was doing, but the fact that no one was paying attention, that's on us. So we can sit here, we can point the fingers all the time, but we cannot ignore our place just as the general public of being sheep and not being the pointers who say, hey, something's not okay with that picture, right? At any point. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautifully put. Oh, Blue, I think you were trying to make a point about the lioness.
Yeah, actually, the Lioness program that the Marines started, the reason they developed that program was because they understood that they were missing the input, the viewpoints of 50% of the population in the areas that they were trying to help. So when you're asking somebody, when you're asking a group of people, when you're trying to deconflict an area, and you know that there are grievances there, grievances that are apparently worth violence, right? Physical violence. And so when you're trying to deconflict an area, whether it's a small area or, an area the size of Ukraine and Russia, their culture, a man couldn't speak. And that's just by respecting their culture, they came up with a different way of seeking that input. And that was through the lionesses. So they found different types of problems that they didn't realize it existed because the men weren't talking about them. And the only people that we were allowed to talk to were the men. So getting that what we came to realize was that men run things outside of the compound, the family compound, called a kalat. It's literally got a wall around it and a gate. And each one is a separate family union, sometimes several generations. But we came to realize that very often the men ran what happened outside of the compound. The women ran the compound. They ran the family. The relationships that young Afghan men had with their mothers. So, oh my God, I never met a young Afghan man who did not absolutely revere his mother. And so, their women had a tremendous amount of power, sometimes political power. I actually worked in an area where basically the most important political figure in that area was a woman. That was an area in it's called Alangar. It's in the kind of the northeast of the country. But that we realized that the women held a tremendous amount of power, and you had to find ways to get to that input and that knowledge.
Okay, so I'm curious about, with women actually having power, but it's being repressed. What are the consequences of that power being repressed? What are we losing?
I'm so glad you asked. May I just answer that question?
Yes, please.
First of all, I wanted to address what Old Blue was explaining. There's actually the same concept in South America. It's called Marianismo, and it makes references to the Virgin Mary, that in the home, the woman has, she's in charge of other things in the home. The man is in charge of the other side. So I just want to let you know that, in that culture, we can find it in different cultures, right? And so I wanted just to say that. The other thing is that I can't help but to liken women's, like the absence of women's voice, right? We talked about the Taliban. We talked about that effect on Afghanistan. Old Blue addressed what happens when we're not paying attention, when we're not listening, right? In the military for so long, things like PTSD, women not being allowed to advance, all these things were like women were being held down in a lot of different areas. And I think for us, a lot of what changed in our military was when women were allowed to were allowed to go on the aircraft carriers, they were allowed to go into combat, they were allowed to get into positions that normally were not open to women. Why? Because you cannot possibly promote someone who does not have the experience of being out in the field and being able to execute a mission in a dangerous zone when a woman wasn't even eligible to go out there. Like, how can you promote this person who does not have that experience over this person that does, right? And so now that's why we're seeing these admirals, we're seeing the head of West Point, we're seeing all these leaders in the military, and we're seeing things being addressed that were never addressed before, because now we have that voice. Looking back, we had all these women in Afghanistan before the Taliban took Afghanistan back over in August. We had women who were mayors. We had women going to university again. We had women having a voice, and they were doing such amazing things in their cultures, in their little small towns, you know. And to hear, once the Taliban took over, the fall of Kabul, to hear women saying, mayors, elected officials, people who were put in power by men and women of their community, having to hear that they were sitting there waiting to be kidnapped because they knew that it was just a matter of time before they were going to get kidnapped, tortured probably, and murdered, right?
Oh
We
my
see the
goodness.
difference when we listen to all voices, when we're able to take these things into consideration and apply, because we all have blind spots. I have someone I'm working with. We work on many projects together, and one of the reasons she and I are so good is because we catch each other's blind spots. That's been two people, right, with certain projects. Imagine communities, imagine countries, imagine when you're able to hear all the voices and consider all these things, you are able to make the world a better place, hopefully. But when you just keep one section out, even if it's a small section, it everything else is unstable, right? It adds instability.
I think Julia can really speak to this because I think constantly as a matchmaker, you are constantly looking at balance, 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 balance.
Well, I mean, people come to me, and first of all, most people that come to me are not ready to be matched at all.
Okay. Okay.
Let me just say that. And unfortunately, people think they know better, right? So the same goes for world leaders, the same goes for people in power. And unfortunately, men that think they know what's best and they know everything. And I have harder time with male clients than I do with female clients, because we seem to be, and again, I don't want to generalize, but it seems that women are more open to not just criticism, but to be growing, to be educated, to learn something that they may not have seen before, like what you were just talking about, to, maybe I didn't even notice that I was doing this or putting this out there on a date or this or that. With men, it's very quick. It's so funny. I just saw a couple of my girlfriends the other night, and we were talking about this. They said, well, what do they say if you tell them, well, you were wrong, you shouldn't have done this, let's do this, let's do that? And they say, well, thank you for your opinion, but you're wrong. And then they're uncoachable, they're unmatchable. And this is the unfortunate part of life, is that most people are not ready to hear what they don't want to hear. And that goes for everything in life.
Mm.
Relationships, everything. Yeah.
I definitely agree with you. Oh my goodness, we are just scratching the surface. I'm so thankful that this is going to be a series, right? The truth of women and war. So I'm so thankful this is going to be a series. I'm thankful that the audience have taken the time to invest themselves in this subject matter and really get energized about it. And I'm very thankful for my guests today. You guys have been phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, blew my mind. Stick around as we wrap it up. At the and the after show for just a minute, but for now we must say goodbye. I just can't thank you enough, audience, for all that you do. If you haven't already, please like, share, and most of all, subscribe. Bye bye for now. You are amazing.
Thank you.